NTD is one of the few, if not the only one, outlet, maybe not only in the US but across the world, where it's actually independent from any political party, economic forces, but most importantly, independent from the CCP's pressuring campaign. We know that, even if you're not a Chinese language outlet, you're an American outlet or like a foreign language outlet, it's very hard to, not actually influence your reporting. And I think that's what makes NTD's reporting unique when it comes to international affairs and also domestic policies, because it really matters to Americans in daily lives.
Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump is set to sign the Export Control Transparency Act, what it does and what it aims to prevent. A day after meeting European leaders in Washington, President Trump now gives more details about the plans for Ukraine. Trump confirms that there won't be American troops on the ground, but he also talks about the difficulty of making a deal with Russia. The takeaways from yesterday's Ukraine war meeting with top leaders we discuss with the panel. After a 2-week standoff came to a close yesterday, Texas Republicans are moving forward with approving redrawn congressional districts. Democrats are under round-the-clock surveillance to prevent another walkout. Governors from 3 more states have approved sending their National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. The latest from the nation's capital, where local officials and the Trump administration have locked horns over the federal takeover of law enforcement. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will start to consider anti-American sentiment for benefit requests. The agency says it plans to expand its vetting process.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on this Tuesday. Russian President Vladimir Putin has agreed to a face-to-face meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt provides the latest updates.
Following the encouraging conversations yesterday, President Trump spoke with President Putin by phone, and he agreed to begin the next phase of the peace process, a meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky, which would be followed, if necessary, by a trilateral meeting between President Putin, President Zelensky, and President Trump. As the president said, Vice President Vance, Secretary Rubio, and Special Envoy Witkoff will continue to coordinate with Russia and Ukraine to make this happen as soon as possible.
The White House says Russia has always greatly respected President Trump and his peace through strength foreign policy approach. The White House says the bilateral talks in Alaska were very productive, and the 2 leaders agreed to multiple key points that open up the door for Phase 2 discussions. The White House also expressed optimism about an opportunity for lasting peace. Leavitt says that every European leader at the meeting yesterday credited Trump for his leadership that reignited the peace dialogue.
That's because President Trump is the peace president, and American leadership is back on the world stage. It should not be lost on anyone in this room that world leaders are coming right here to Washington, D.C. for help. While previous presidents have traveled halfway around the world to apologize for America, President Trump stands up for America, and he has firmly restored America's status as the undisputed leader of the free world.
The White House emphasizes that Trump believes diplomacy requires open dialogue and that he understands what both sides want. Trump has said that in order to get a good deal, both sides are going to have to walk away a little bit unhappy. President Trump says there won't be American troops on the ground in Ukraine, this just 1 day after a major meeting of European leaders in Washington discussing potential security guarantees for Kyiv. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has more on the ongoing effort to achieve peace in Ukraine.
Global leaders keep working toward peace in Ukraine on Tuesday. This just 1 day after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky joined multiple European heads of state in a visit to Washington. Among them were leaders from Britain and France, who have previously said they're open to deploying troops to Ukraine as peacekeepers after a possible peace deal. While talking to Fox News on Tuesday, President Trump suggested that this means there's no need for American soldiers in Ukraine.
It won't be American boots on the ground defending that border.
Well, you have my assurance, and I'm president, and I'm just trying to stop people from being killed.
Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday. He's working to close the gap and get the two sides to agree to a peace deal.
We're going to find out about President Putin in the next couple of weeks, that I can tell you, and we're going to see where it all goes. It's possible that he doesn't want to make a deal.
But Trump acknowledges that Putin might not be willing to make a deal. The next step in the process is a possible meeting with Putin and Zelensky. French President Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday recommended that such a meeting could be held either in Rome or in Geneva. Meanwhile, Russia's foreign minister says land swaps between Russia and Ukraine might be necessary for a possible peace deal.
Territorial changes are often an essential component of conflict resolution. There are many such examples.
Russia currently occupies around a fifth of Ukraine. President Trump previously said that he wants to help Ukraine get back the land which Russia annexed after the invasion. And the Coalition of the Willing had a virtual meeting on Tuesday, further talking about the Ukraine war. The coalition is a group of nations created to support Ukraine. They're now working on security guarantees for Kiev, but the group only just started.
There have been no decisions thus far as what comes to the overall framework and neither to the individual contributions.
Members of the coalition say they're still early in the process and details have to be worked out. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
President Trump is urging Russia to accept a ceasefire in Ukraine. Differences remain, however, over security guarantees and Ukraine's future in NATO and the EU. Some experts remain skeptical that an agreement can be reached. NTD international correspondent David Vivez explains.
During a press conference at the White House on Monday, EU leaders called for pressure on Russia to accept a ceasefire. Speaking before his meeting with Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron said there would need to be a strong Ukrainian army as part of the security conditions for any peace deal. The US administration has addressed that the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine should be discussed. One of the motives cited by Putin was the demilitarization of Ukraine and preventing it from joining NATO. Although President Trump gave President Putin guarantees on that point, several experts have noticed mixed signals from European leaders that may go against this stance, including those from President Macron. According to a former investigator with the Organizations for Security and Cooperation in Europe and author of What I Saw in Ukraine, EU leaders have not moved from their full support of Ukraine.
The recent statements we heard from European leaders such as Russia should have no say whether Ukraine can join NATO or not, or that the Ukrainian military should not be limited in size as part of any agreement. This goes directly against the declared purposes of the special military operations that the Russians launched in February 2022. So, and the Russians continue to say until now that they will not accept any peace deal that would not address the root causes of the conflict.
During the 3 years of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, EU leaders have moved forward with proposals for Ukraine's integration into the EU, along with plans to reinforce military cooperation in the long term. Paris says this could be the crucial point to resolve in the coming negotiations for a peace deal.
At least Trump is sincere regarding the idea of reaching a peace agreement in Ukraine. I think the intent is there. Whether he can achieve it is a different question, because he doesn't have all the leverage in this case. I think it's a good thing that there are talks, right? It's better to have talks than no talks at all. But even we know, as I said, that positions are very far apart to start with.
The definition of the necessary security conditions was at the heart of yesterday's negotiations between EU leaders and President Trump. In April, Vladimir Putin rejected an earlier plan by President Macron and Chancellor Scholz to send a European armed force, a coalition of the willing, to secure Ukraine. However, President Trump said Russia has agreed to security guarantees proposed by Western allies. Experts believe that if this materializes, it would be a major step toward a peace plan. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
More Russian attacks in Ukraine as peace negotiations continue. Ukraine's energy ministry said today an overnight Russian attack hit energy facilities in the Poltava region, causing large fires. The ministry said several dozen drones targeted a gas transport facility, causing damage. The ministry did not specify what other facilities besides gas infrastructure were attacked. Russian media reported an oil refinery supplying fuel to Ukrainian armed forces were struck. The Poltava region is home to Ukraine's only oil refinery, Kremenchuk. The facility has been repeatedly attacked by both drones and missiles. The ministry said Ukrainian energy facilities had been attacked 2,900 times since March 2025. Joining us now to discuss key takeaways from yesterday's White House meeting on the Ukraine war is Mike Leon, NTD News contributor and host of Can We Please Talk podcast. And also Tony Kinnett, national correspondent with the Daily Signal and host of the Tony Kinnett Cast radio show and podcast. So good to see you both. Again, it's been a while. Hope everyone is doing well. Tony, I'll start with you. What was the most consequential development, in your view, from yesterday's meeting?
I think the most consequential development, and by the way, good to see both of you guys again, it has been a while. The most consequential development, bar none, is that Trump was able to walk away from the meeting with the European leaders, reach out to Putin, and eventually get some kind, at least according to reporting from the Financial Times and the German Foreign Ministry, possible Zelensky and Putin sit down. That's the first time that's happened since well before the war began. And again, this kind of movement is occurring now. Again, with the economic leverage that Trump is bringing to bear, not just in possible sanctions or tariffs, but in $300 billion worth of frozen Russian assets. This is actually getting Putin a little bit closer to the table. His offensive lines have stalled. They're still slinging drones and artillery, and just at a single oil refinery district. So at least at this point, it appears that if Trump has been able to craft momentum with European leaders, not to mention the asset purchase agreements by Ukraine, this could be one of the biggest peace deals that we've seen in decades.
Okay, Mike, what are your impressions from yesterday's events leading up to today?
Yeah, good to see everybody, as was echoed by both of you. Yeah, I'll piggyback a little bit on what Tony said there, because I heard it just as I was coming on here from the Associated Press that interviewed Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor afterwards as well, and Starmer as well, the Prime Minister in UK. And they mentioned about exactly what Tony said, which is this bilateral talk between Putin and Zelensky. The two of them, I don't believe, if memory serves me right, haven't talked to each other since 2019, since that famous picture of Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel and them sitting at that ceasefire agreement back in 2019. So that's one of the biggest things for me. I will say this, look, and I'm one of those folks that will give the president credit when he does something. When he does it, I will give him credit. I can't speak for other pundits out there on television. I'll give him credit. I'll piggyback on what Tony said. This could be one of the biggest peace deals. He should be championing this if this does come to fruition. But I hate what he said today on Fox News earlier this morning with some of my old colleagues there on the morning show with Brian Kilmeade and them, talking about Ukraine taking on a country like Russia. In 2022, February of 2022, Russia invaded a sovereign country in Ukraine. In December of 2019, there was a peace agreement already and ceasefire in place with security assurances between Russia and Ukraine in that famous photo that now exists for everyone to go research. In 2022, 3 years later, Putin reneged on all of that. Whether he feels that NATO is infringing upon his right to reunify the Soviet Union, that's of no consequence right now. That's not what I'm talking about. He invaded a sovereign country. The President of the United States needs to focus on that, but I will give him total credit because, like I said, and like Tony said, what emerged from those conversations yesterday was that we could have both of these leaders in Putin and Zelensky talking to one another, and then a trilateral meeting where Trump will obviously be the third party within that meeting, and we could potentially get security assurances, which Caroline Levitt was asked today in the White House press briefing. How do you make sure that this goes beyond 2025, 2026, and beyond Trump's presidency into a future administration? And those are things that we're gonna need to hear answers to, Don, for sure.
Okay, so we'll get to security guarantees a little bit later in this conversation. I want to dwell a little bit. I just want to dwell a little bit on Mike's point of giving credit where credit is due, I think it's important. So please give us your comments, to the scope of this meeting, right, with Trump, Zelensky, and so many top European leaders gathered around the same table at the White House.
So I want to point out two things. First of all, I think Mike is, again, very accurate when he says that he praises where praise is due and he criticizes where criticism is due. That speaks to his, again, his value morally as a broadcaster. He is very correct, and he always tries to be, from what I can see, very fair on that. So regarding the 2 points that he made and then what you referenced on, and during the Biden years, we were told that Trump had diminished the U.S. on the world stage, that we had actually made the U.S. appear weak, and that actually everything was going to be wonderful and amazing. And it was catastrophic foreign failure, tantamount to the Obama administration before Trump won. And we saw this again. The 2019 ceasefire, which was signed, was supposed to be the French and the Brits, at the prompting of the United States, backing up Ukrainian security guarantees. And then Russia invaded, and we saw the Brits and the French do what they're famous for doing: nothing. And this is something that I think the Trump administration this time around is making sure that we can actually see security guarantees in a stopgap measure, keeping the Brits and the French stationed troops like we have in South Korea to prevent Russia from getting a little antsy, because it would be dead Brits and Frenchmen on the line instead of just soft-handed European guarantees with a Toblerone. So I'm really hoping that, at least as far as the Trump administration is moving forward this time, that you're seeing a lot of really harsh economic action and leverage, which says, if you don't want to be betrayed on the world economy, then fine, stay at war forever. I don't care. And that seems to be Trump's methodology, whether he's dealing with India and Pakistan or the Congo or Rwanda or any of the nations. Again, 6 different ceasefires or peace agreements in the last couple of months. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And again, the self-efficacy of Trump being able to come out and say, or the self-deprecacy, excuse me, of, look, I thought it was going to be easier to negotiate the end to this, and it wasn't. Now we're out here doing the work. I'm really pleasantly surprised and cautiously optimistic, and that's a very dangerous feeling.
All right, so we have a return of Tony's impression of President Trump. But Mike, can I get your comments to other parts of his comments over there? The White House also reiterating this point earlier in the day in that press conference with Caroline Leavitt. Does this meeting underscore a show of U.S. leadership in the world stage?
Well, first off, it's a fantastic impression. A lot of people say Tony is phenomenal. No, but look, I've come around to this, Don. I'll be honest, as I've spoken with not only former Obama State Department employees, I've spoken to military personnel that have kind of changed my opinion on this. And the real stance is this, right? I've always mentioned, with a new administration comes in, there's a tweak in the foreign policy. There's a tweak in the immigration policy. They don't run on it during the campaign cycle because it's tougher to implement once they get into office. Mm-hmm. But now that once they're in office, you see how it's implemented. When they first came into office, Rich Ganell did an interview, I forget with what podcast or wherever it was, and he said, we're going to talk to Russia. Marco Rubio's second trip, I believe it was, after going to the countries in Central America, was really going to Saudi Arabia to meet with Sergei Lavrov. Like, it's a different approach, right? And Putin, even, I don't want to give Putin any credit, but Putin even said this in his presser through the Russian translation, which is, we never spoke to the previous administration. It's good to see that we actually are talking again. And I've come around to this point, Don, that you do need to speak to the adversary. Unfortunately, he is the president of Russia. Obviously, we know about the things that he has done, the political opponents he's had killed. Navalny, Yevgeny Prigozhin was alive just a year ago. Now he's no longer with us. Like, we know of those things that Vladimir Putin has done with respect to Russia. But unfortunately, he is the president of Russia. And Trump has taken it upon himself to first meet with Ukrainian counterparts, and then he met with Russia, and now he's meeting with Ukraine again, and he's trying to organize this. I was very staunch on, I wouldn't do any of this, but again, I'm not a military, I'm not a foreign affairs expert, I'm not a State Department former official or anything like that, but I do think there's something in this with respect to negotiating with both sides. Now, unlike a seesaw, or like a seesaw, I should say, there aren't two sides to this. One invaded the other country. And we have to make sure that we understand that. The European allies understand that everyone understands that Vladimir Putin's goal has always been, and he has said this is not Mike Leon saying it because I don't speak Russian. He has always said this. He wants to reunify the Soviet Union. It's been one of his goals. So if he wants to do that, the first natural invasion was of Ukraine. And where would it stop? Where would it end from there? That's always been the fear of the European countries. That's been the fear of people that you talk to that cover geopolitics, especially that part of the world. I think President Trump, to Tony's point, is saying, look, we don't want to be in the business of war. We don't want to send ground troops, which I totally agree with. We don't want to be the world's supercop, which I totally agree with. That costs money. That costs U.S. lives a lot of the time. So if we want to get out of that business, we need to negotiate peace, regardless of one person being the dictator and the aggressor in all of this, and the other country being the sovereign country that was invaded. So I've come around to this positioning that we do need to negotiate with this. And like I said, I will give credit if he negotiates this. Forget about some of these other conflicts and some that were little lesser known. Russia, Ukraine, and the war in the Middle East and what's happening in Gaza were the two biggest things that were talked about during the campaign cycle. If President Trump were to solve one or both, with resolution and an end to innocent civilians being killed in this and the mass casualties that have happened, I will be the first person to hop on this network or any other network for that matter and give him credit. Other people won't do that. I will.
Okay, Tony, a lot to react there. One point I have is in terms of a security guarantee, how could this deal be different from the Budapest Memorandum in the 90s, right, in which the US, UK, and Russia gave security assurances to Ukraine, and then we remember Russia then annexed Crimea in 2014, and then again in 2022 it denied violating the memorandum, characterizing it as security, characterizing those security assurances as sort of a political statement rather than a binding treaty. So your thoughts?
Well, the answer to that is rather simple. It's actually European boots on the ground. So Europe has the desire not to see the Soviet Union reunified. It means that French, British, most likely German troops, or at the very least Dutch troops, are placed in the region in the same way that the United States maintains the border of South Korea. I think this is what we see in the same way with Taiwan. Your economic and military interests in the region demand that you pony up. Soft words and diplomatic kind Hallmark cards do not actually maintain a border. They do not. Telling people do not cross this border doesn't keep people across the border. A wall and force does. That is a reality of humanity. We can pretend that Sesame Street governs the world. It does not. So there are going to have to be European boots on the ground. But I think this also goes to the president's kind of rationale and communication here, and all the way back to a point that Mike made about a clip from President Trump earlier this morning on Fox News when he was talking about Ukraine not being able to take on Russia alone. So not having heard the entirety of that clip, if the president was just characterizing Ukraine in general as having started the war or being just as guilty as Russia, that would be factually incorrect. However, Zelensky has shown a feat dragging, understandably so, given that it was his country's territory that was taken, in opposition to peace talks. And the point that I believe, again, I haven't seen the full clip, but if Trump was making the point that Russia is not a foe that Ukraine can take on alone, that's true. Ukraine can't take on Russia alone. And so therefore, there do in fact need to be some giving and taking from the Europeans, from the United States, in exchange for certain security guarantees, both in property and in lives. This is, again, an unfortunate political reality that if you're going to keep the Soviet Union from rising again, there have to be sacrifices that are made. Again, I don't think that a sovereign country's borders should be invaded by the power-hungry dictator and quasi-fascist of Russia. Yet in this particular instance, to pretend that Donald Trump can go in and say, well, Russia, you're very, very bad. Well, okay, then Putin will just simply not come to the table. He doesn't mind if another 2 million Russians die in the meat grinder. That's every Russian leader for the last 2 centuries. So he has to play the impartial moderator, despite that there will be a little bit of pearl clutching in the meantime, even if he's doing it kind of tongue in cheek.
So, Mike, how far away do you think we are from actually achieving peace and an end to the war?
Well, Don and Tony said a lot as well about this. Like, it's so complex. It's so hard. Like the president of the United States, and just to quickly clarify for Tony, because the way he was saying it was the former, how you say it, not the latter. He was saying you can't take on an opponent of that size, almost insinuating that they had something to do with the start of this war. But I'll let you listen to the comments, and then you can react, obviously, on your own. But this is part of the complexities of this, right? Like, Marco Rubio in 2022, not Mike Leon, a different Cuban man, Marco Rubio said, you don't negotiate with Vladimir Putin because you can't trust him, right? So therein lies part of the problem. How do we trust somebody, to your point, Don, different times has done different things that have infringed upon another sovereign country? If you look up in a thesaurus what the word annexation, similar words, that means seizure, that means invasion. Those are things that Vladimir Putin did under two different administrations, both Democratic-led, right? So the problem with all of this is that Trump doesn't want any more wars. He campaigned on no new wars. And like I said, I've come around to this, Don, because if we're taking it at face value, as Donald Trump has always maintained, that, you know, this is what I want to do. Stop asking this person, you come to me, right? Well, if we're coming to him and he says he wants to negotiate peace in the region, how do we have security assurances? Because they've been broken on several different occasions by the dictator, aka the Russian president. So how do we negotiate that? It's for people that are way smarter than the three of us to negotiate that. But I think, to Tony's point, it does start with European troops on the ground. I think there has to be some concession of that. The realities of the war right now, secession of land by Ukraine into some of the parts of eastern Ukraine that have already been Russian controlled. It sounds terrible. It does sound terrible. It is terrible because they were invaded. But unfortunately, if we do want the conflict to end, these are things that Steve Witkoff and the delegation that President Trump has assigned to do this work is trying to negotiate right now. This is why it's so complex, Don, because, again, there are different people that think that, no, you know, Ukraine with its dance with NATO and stuff like that, and NATO, you know, kind of infringing upon, Russia, that they were within their right to do this. That's not the case. It's just not. I'm not a historian, but that's not the case. We have to treat things the way they are, and that's why this is so complex and so hard. But like I said, I will give the president credit. A, meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska. B, obviously having this semi-summit here in the U.S. with the Ukrainian president and obviously the other leaders involved in this. And C, if he gets this trilateral meeting on the books and we do get everlasting peace or some type of agreement that is not broken in perpetuity, incredible. It would be incredible stuff from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
All right, Tony, we're just about out of time. You can have the final thought here. Yesterday, President Trump on social media wrote along the lines that Zelensky has the ability to end the war immediately if he wanted to. Something along those lines. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that is true. If Zelensky gives in to Russian demands, that's certainly possible. I don't think that's the goal and the benefit, but that is Trump saying that is one of the ends here. You have a high school team going up against the LA Lakers. And no matter how much you really want the high school team to win, they're not going to do it. So either you broker a tie, you broker a stand down, which I don't want to negotiate with them either. But unfortunately, Russia has a large army and a large tactical arsenal that they're just crazy enough to use if things get bad enough. So you do have to play this a little more carefully than when you're in our nation's nobility class in the Senate and you can say loud things very angrily because it gives you camera time.
Well, all right, great conversation again today. Thank you very much, you both, Mike, Tony.
Good to see you guys.
Coming up, after a 2-week standoff came to a close yesterday, Texas Republicans are moving forward with approving redrawn congressional districts. Democrats are under round-the-clock supervision to prevent another walkout. Stay tuned.
I trod on my glasses yesterday, and I had to pay up front for a new pair that I can't even pick up for another 10 days. So I looked for another way, and I found Select Specs. I ordered online. My new glasses just arrived this morning, and I can pay over the next few weeks. This is the way to buy glasses.
See now, pay later with Select Specs. Next day delivery and deferred payment options only at selectspecs.com.
Hot meals, safe shelter, medical care, and love to more than 2,000 young people who sleep at a Covenant House every night. Homeless young people are afraid and alone. Your monthly donation right now will show them they are loved and safe.
I have no words to express how Covenant House changed my life.
Call or go online now and give just $19 a month. We'll send you this comforting blanket as a reminder of the difference you're making in a young person's life. Call or go online now to safeplacetosleep.org.
I don't know why you're so sad. You've got a roof over your head.
You gotta stop with that depression stuff. That's what white people think. You alright?
It just feels like it's coming from everywhere.
Do you want to talk about it?
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Breaking news coming out of North Carolina, a car crashed into a building in Wilmington, rupturing a gas line and causing a massive explosion. Wilmington police say a car hit the gas line to the Eastern Carolina Veterinarian Referral Building at around 11:30 a.m. The driver has been taken into custody. 3 firefighters were injured while putting out the fire. Police say this is an active situation and emergency crews continue to secure the area. This is a developing story. We'll keep you updated with the latest. And U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will start to consider anti-American sentiment when immigrants request benefits. The agency says it plans to expand its vetting process. Immigration officers will examine factors relating to immigrants' past requests for parole. Additionally, the agency will look into any involvement in anti-American or terrorist organizations. Citizenship and Immigration Services has also expanded the types of benefit requests that receive social media vetting. Reviews for anti-American activity will be part of a vetting process. A government spokesperson said, quote, America's benefits should not be given to those who despise the country and promote anti-American ideologies. The spokesperson added, quote, immigration benefits, including to live and work in the United States, remain a privilege, not a right. Today's announcement follows an August 15th update for naturalization applications, according to the new policy. Applicants seeking citizenship must demonstrate that the agency called good moral character. After a 2-week standoff came to a close yesterday, Texas Republicans are moving forward with approving redrawn congressional districts. That gives Republicans the upper hand in the midterms. NTD's Melina Weiskup has updates.
State lawmakers were able to meet quorum in Texas on Monday, meaning they now have enough members present to move forward with legislation. When those Democrats did return, they were met with halls filled with supporters. So it's clear that Democrats have successfully motivated their grassroots base, at least in the state of Texas. But despite this pushback from those Democrat voters, Republicans are very likely to pass this map because they simply hold the majority in the state house in Texas. Democrats say, though they don't have the numbers to stop this legislation, they're prepared to fight back with what tools they do have. Listen.
So we'll fight in the courts, and then blue states around the country are mobilizing to combat this at the federal level.
So in addition to these lawsuits that Democrats are filing to challenge this new map, they're also levying other blue states to try to offset those potential Republican gains in the state of Texas. California was the first to move forward with this effort. Lawmakers have already released a redrawn congressional map that would give Democrats the upper hand in 5 congressional districts, meaning that 5 sitting House Republicans could face tougher races for the midterms. Here's one of them.
Looking at my state of California, I'm extremely concerned for what I consider to be a threat to democracy. Our voters spoke very clearly when they set up an independent citizens commission to do redistricting, saying that politicians should not be in charge of drawing their own district lines.
And when you look at California, Illinois, Massachusetts, New York, they've squeezed out all Republicans they can possibly squeeze out.
Now, the House Speaker in Texas has gavelled members out, and they're not expected to return until Wednesday. The governor says at that time they're expected to vote to approve this map, and he's expected to sign it into law by the end of the week. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
President Trump signed a bill today that improves transparency and export control for American goods and technology. The bill passed Congress last month with bipartisan support. The act requires the Department of Commerce to annually report to Congress on export control licensing and enforcement actions. This bill specifically targets American military technology exports to foreign adversaries, such as Communist China. Lawmakers who introduced the bill say they want to prevent American technologies from falling into the hands of firms tied to the Chinese military. Joining us now to discuss President Trump's actions to try to get rid of voting by mail is Matt Klink, Republican strategist and political analyst. And we also have Madeline Somerville, attorney, political speechwriter, and strategist. Good afternoon to you both, first of all. So Matt, starting with you, the Constitution gives states authority over running their own elections, right? This is the case. Is the president then overreaching?
Well, look, he's highlighting a big problem, and we can go into great detail about that. Like, for example, why California accepts absentee ballots postmarked on election day a week after, and it now takes a month to count ballots. They don't require ID to cast said ballot, and everyone who was registered to vote gets an absentee ballot. I think that Donald Trump is highlighting a larger problem, but I don't think that the executive order is going to be the cure to that problem, because ultimately states and individual counties within states control those elections.
Okay, Madeline, what do you think about this? President Trump says on Truth Social that, I'm quoting here, the states are merely an agent for the federal government in counting and tabulating the votes, and they must do what the federal government, as represented by the President of the United States, tells them. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's scary. That's some authoritarian language right there. When you're considering the alleged issue, which I appreciate that Matt acknowledged, of mail-in ballots being fraudulent, according to the Heritage Foundation, which is arguably the most conservative think tank and most supportive of Trump in the United States, between 1979 and today, there's only been 250 potential cases of fraud with mail-in ballots. 250 out of billions and billions and billions, right? So this is not an issue. So why bring it up? And I think why is a really important question to ask. And the answer is to undermine confidence in elections. And when you continue to highlight issues that aren't issues, and you continue to propagate that as a problem and put that into people's minds, I think if you're the president, you know exactly what you're doing, which is undermining the confidence in our election systems.
But Madeline, let me follow up on your point there. From an absolute standpoint, a statistical point of view, does in-person voting have less chance for irregularities compared to other methods?
Actually, I have heard that mail-in ballots have less of a chance of fraud. According to the Heritage Foundation, right, 250 of those that they thought were fraudulent were the mail-ins. And in total, there were 1,400 votes. The remainders were in person. And so it's actually more likely that if you're in person that there'll be fraud or tabulated incorrectly, because there are more safeguards that are in place for those that are mail-in ballots. So it's actually the exact opposite. And it's interesting, President Carter's my favorite president. And the other day during the summit, President Trump referenced President Carter and said, even President Carter said that it was a bad idea to do mail-in ballots. That's not what he said. He said that it has potential for fraud when not conducted correctly. And in fact, in his most recent statement on it before he passed, he said that he thought it was the safest way to vote.
Okay, Matt, let me get a response to what you heard from Madeline.
Madeline raises some valid points, but the problem right now is that there is such significant variance when, for example, you allow people who are in this country illegally to be given driver's licenses. They then register to vote. And we do have examples of people registering to vote. You then have, every single person who is registered to vote in California receives an absentee ballot via mail. They turn in that ballot and it takes a month to tabulate said ballots. They're not allowed then to share those ballots, so you can't check to see who voted fraudulently. I think that the technology is there if we want to make this ultimately secure. And what I think Donald Trump is trying to get at is that many states, ironically enough, the Democratic states don't believe in using voter ID to prove that you have to vote. And in terms of absentee ballots, look, states are going to do what they want to do. It would be great to go back to what it was like when I was a kid, where you went to sleep on election night and you woke up the next morning and knew who won. We should make it easier for people to vote. We should have maybe vote on Sunday, maybe vote over 2 or 3 days. Look, I'm in California. We've been voting by absentee ballot ever since I started to vote. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is the lack of assurances that the right people are voting, and the system is rigged so that you can never check. And then the Democrats say, but there's no evidence of fraud. Well, if you can't check, there's no way to prove whether there is fraud or not. So
I would
we
love
can
to
make
respond
this,
if I
we
could.
can accomplish both. We can help both out. We can make it easier to vote, and we can make sure that only those who are allowed to vote, vote.
Okay, Madeline.
Sure. So only those who are allowed to vote, vote. I don't know what the stats are in California, but I can tell you that in Georgia, in the 2020 election, there were, from different studies, because I looked at all of them that were considered legitimate, between 3 and 11 potential illegal immigrants that even registered to vote, right? And it was 3 or less that would have been counted. Illegal immigrants voting is not a problem in the United States of America, period. It's not an issue. And to continue touting that as a problem is serious. And Democrats do believe in voter ID. You still have to show something. They just don't believe in certain forms of ID being required. Absolutely, we do. In every state, it's required.
Okay.
I beg to differ. In California, that's not the case.
All right,
California is off
one
the
at a
radar,
time.
okay?
That way I can actually hear what you guys are saying if we speak one at a time. Okay, Madeline, some points for you to respond to here. In 2020 and 2024, we saw mail-in ballots arriving late. That's a fact, and counting dragging on in some cases.
Yeah, the timing of it was difficult. And I know that in the 2024 election, it was even worse, especially for Georgia, because there were last-minute regulations that were placed on poll workers who had to comply as quickly as possible. I didn't start working in the legislature until after the 2020 election, so I can't attest to anything from having witnessed it there. But I do know that in 2024, right, the Republican-led council imposed all of these regulations at the very last minute, and they had to try to keep up. And so I'm not sure if that was the problem in the first place. I mean, you can always do things that make sense, but when you try to impose regulations 6 weeks before an election after everyone's already trained, of course you're going to have delays.
Okay, Matt, if you wanted to continue your thought from earlier.
Yeah, no, look, I think that Madeline and I think, are largely going to be in agreement here that, again, I have no problem with absentee balloting. I've been doing it my entire life. I think the problems that exist with it are easily fixed, and that is voter ID. That Madeline may not agree with me on that, but I do think, look, if absentee ballots are mailed out 6 weeks before the election, we should have a rule that if they're not received and postmarked on election day, then they shouldn't be counted. You shouldn't have to wait a week till after the election, and then it takes you a month to count. That breeds suspicion. Have everything wrapped up on election night. Florida, which is a huge state, had their kerfuffle in 2020 with their butterfly ballot. They get their results done that night. And that makes everybody feel comfortable that what they're seeing is what actually takes place. That's common sense. So, I think that you're going to see strong agreement from us on that. But again, I don't believe that the executive order that Trump said, it might garner him some publicity. It's not going to change the way people vote across the United States.
Okay, Madeline, let's get your response and also talk about how we can improve trust among Americans in the election system.
I think we could start with the president speaking the truth about what's actually going on with the election systems. When I was in the legislature, I had the opportunity to read the studies that Secretary Brad Raffensperger authored and conducted 3 different times in order to make sure that there wasn't fraud in our elections. And like I said, it was between 3 and 11, but they settled on 8 ballots right after checking 3 times. And yet we have the president asking Georgia for, 1,100 some votes. I think it starts at the top. When you start perpetuating these falsities, it makes it difficult for me to trust him in general, right? I'm a talking head. I come on and I talk about these things and I try to be as neutral as possible, but I can't give him the benefit of the doubt when I know he's going on TV and telling his supporters things that aren't true and then repeating them to people like me who are saying, but wait, it's not true. How can I defend myself against that when the facts aren't enough?
Okay, Matt, do we need a cleaner, simpler voting system? You were talking about this point earlier in this conversation. How do we achieve that?
Well, I think that there are some common sense reforms that are neither Republican or Democrat led that would make the system certainly more straightforward. Look, I think that why we vote on the first Tuesday in November is an artifact of times past. We could easily vote on the weekend, and it would make life a lot easier, and it would probably make it more convenient for women and men that are punching a time clock to get in and vote. I think that we could make it so that, if your ballot is not received on election day, it doesn't count, period. That's why we give people ballots 6 weeks early. These are just those aren't even the controversial ones. We could get into voter ID, which I know that then there's minorities and old people have a problem getting IDs, which I think has been largely disproven, but let's not even go there. If those first two things happen, it would make elections so much easier. And I will finally, in response to Madeline, this is not a Republican problem. It's a Republican and a Democratic problem. When you have, evidence now that has come out about Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and others skewing intelligence reports to say that Russians were favoring Donald Trump in the 2016 election when they weren't. I mean, we can play whataboutism till the cows come home, but I think that we can do some very simple things to make the system better so that all Americans say, yeah, the vote is legitimate, and they don't have to wait for a month to find out what the results are.
Okay, I started with Matt. Madeline, you get the final word.
Sure. And Matt is absolutely right. We are very much in agreement about the fact that this is a bipartisan issue. We want to have free and fair elections on all sides. But the fact is that in terms of limiting access to voting, it's always been on the Republican side. I disagree in a lot of different ways with the lack of identification that's necessary for that Democrats have pushed in terms of ID. I agree that there need to be more. But the problem is the argument that the Republicans are making as to why undermines confidence in the election system, which ended up inspiring an insurrection, right? There are consequences to this kind of rhetoric that's straight up false. That's just not true. And we're getting a little off topic here with talking about Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, but it speaks to the larger issue, which is let's hear the truth from the White House about what's going on here. Because when somebody asks me as a Democratic strategist, are you worried about authoritarianism in the United States? When I hear falsities come from the White House, it's hard for me to defend against it.
Well, okay, I'm
Madeline,
certain
for the party that pushed Jim Crow laws for decades in the South, it's ironic that you said that the Republicans are at fault.
All right. Okay, I'm sure there's more to be said about this conversation, but you both have raised a number of great points already. I think we can leave the conversation here for now. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Coming up, governors from 3 more states have approved sending their National Guard troops to Washington, D.C., the latest from the nation's capital, where local officials and the Trump administration have locked horns over the federal takeover of law enforcement. That and more after the break.
Hi, I'm Ryan Blaney, a third-generation race car driver, and we dedicate a lot of our time to going as fast as possible. My grandpa Lou is the reason why my dad and I started racing, and I'm really proud to follow in his tracks. But when my grandpa was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it was a very unexpected bump in the road for us. I've learned a lot on this journey with my grandpa Lou, and the memories of my grandpa will always be with me. And in our family, we're used to getting involved, and I encourage you to do the same, especially when it comes to caring for your loved ones. When I think about Alzheimer's and the impact it had on my family, I recognize that losing a race isn't such a bad day after all. It's important to notice if older family members are acting differently, experiencing problems with their memory, or having trouble with routine tasks. Talking about Alzheimer's can be really tough, but if you notice something, have a conversation with your loved one. Encourage them to see a doctor or offer to go with them. Early detection of Alzheimer's can give your family time to explore support services, make a plan for the future, and access available treatments. If you or your family are noticing changes, it could be Alzheimer's. Talk about seeing a doctor together.
That first time seeing my son, I feel like my life did a 180. I was already trying to change my perspective of life and really just be a father figure that I never had. Being present is the most important part. I'm still growing every day. Becoming a better version of myself. To be the better mirror for my son. I mean, he's just growing. He's becoming his own person. Man, at first I saw him dance, bro, he brings the vibes, you know what I'm saying? He brings the party no matter what. He really a definition of like why he loves somebody. And I love him to the death of me.
Governors from several southern states are sending National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. They're joining President Trump's push to crack down on the crime in the nation's capital. But local leaders say the move is unnecessary. Here are the details.
Governors from Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee are deploying troops to Washington to back President Trump's crackdown on crime. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves announced Monday that 200 Guard members will head to the Capitol. In his statement, Reeves wrote, "Crime is out of control, and it's clear something needs to be done about it." Louisiana and Tennessee are also sending forces alongside earlier commitments from West Virginia, South Carolina, and Ohio. The additional troops join hundreds of federal agents already deployed across the city. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser has condemned Trump's action, saying it doesn't make sense.
The numbers on the ground in the district don't support 1,000 people from other states coming to Washington, D.C. You know that. This is not about something that fits into logic.
Bowser and other D.C. officials state that crime in Washington has actually dropped in recent months. But the Trump administration says the crackdown is already producing results, with nearly 400 arrests and dozens of weapons seized. The president has authority to control the D.C. Police Department for 30 days without congressional approval. But Trump is already signaling he may seek an extension and even declare a national emergency if he doesn't get one. House Republicans are backing the effort, but legal challenges from D.C. officials are mounting. D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab has sued the Trump administration, saying the takeover of the police force is an affront to the city's dignity and autonomy.
The Transportation Department could withhold up to 25% of federal funding for New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority. The department cited safety risks for track maintenance workers. The department's Federal Transit Administration pointed to the November 2023 death of a track maintenance employee. The agency cited a second serious injury to a worker in June 2024. A department audit last year identified significant safety deficiencies and the need for additional oversight. According to the Transit Administration, the MTA saw 38 potential employee near misses in 2023, a 58% increase from 2022. The department is requiring the MTA to submit a new comprehensive risk assessment within 30 days. The Trump administration says it's targeting more imports of Chinese goods, including steel, copper, and lithium. It comes as part of high-priority enforcement efforts to prevent human rights abuses involving the Uyghurs. In a post on X, the Department of Homeland Security says it's also designating caustic soda and red dates under the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem saying separately on X, quote, "The use of slave labor is repulsive and we will hold the Chinese companies accountable." Former Hong Kong Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying, who also serves as vice chairman of Beijing's top political advisory body, is reportedly threatening a religious group in Finland. Here's what happened.
Once we have your names, we can immediately investigate you one by one when we return. Your name is Miao Fengjuan, right?
The encounter was reported by Falun Gong practitioners in Finland. They often gather in parks and tourist areas to raise awareness about the Chinese Communist regime's human rights abuses and its persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China. Last week, former Hong Kong Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying met them in a local park while they were collecting signatures in support of human rights.
In Hong Kong, after so many years, we have thoroughly investigated everything about Falun Gong.
Falun Gong is a spiritual practice that began in mainland China in 1992. Within a few years, it spread across China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and internationally. Since the Chinese Communist regime's brutal crackdown in 1999, Falun Gong has remained legally registered in Hong Kong and many other countries. Many practitioners from mainland China have fled persecution, seeking refuge in democracies around the world.
Have you been to China? Have you been to China?
I'm from China. If my family had stayed in China, we would have died.
Leung Chun-ying and his wife questioned the practitioners' beliefs and rejected claims of human rights abuses by the Chinese Communist Party. Today, more than 100 million people worldwide practice Falun Gong. In May, the U.S. House of Representatives unanimously passed the Falun Gong Protection Act.
Coming up, Hamas accepts proposed deal for a ceasefire with Israel and hostage release. We have that and more after the break.
I trod on my glasses yesterday, and I had to pay up front for a new pair that I can't even pick up for another 10 days. So I looked for another way, and I found Select Specs. I ordered online. My new glasses just arrived this morning, and I can pay over the next few weeks. This is the way to buy glasses.
See now, pay later with Select Specs. Next day delivery and deferred payment options only at selectspecs.com.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
They're just young people, hungry, homeless, and vulnerable. Abused youth often feel safer on the street. Now, more than ever, that's the most dangerous place of all. Covenant House is helping young adults facing homelessness. We're providing safe shelter to thousands, but the need is overwhelming, and no young person is ever turned away. Please call or go online now with your gift of $19 a month to help a young person. You'll provide safe shelter, hot meals, and medical care. Your gift will show them they're loved. Homeless young people are afraid and alone with nowhere else to turn.
You want to know that there's somewhere you can go that's safe. So the Covenant House did that for us.
Please call now with your gift of $19 a month. We'll send you this blanket as a reminder of the comfort your gift provides a young person tonight. Please don't wait. Your gift is the lifeline a young person needs now. Call the number on your screen or go online to safeplacetosleep.org. Thank you for saving precious lives.